Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the School of Self-Worth. I'm your host, Nicole Song. This week, I am so thrilled to welcome Grace Young Foster to our show. So, I follow Grace on social media, and I had always really admired her story. Grace is someone who came to the United States when she was 5 years old from Korea as an adoptee. But listening to the details of her story, I really was so blown away about what she experienced in the foster care system before she was adopted, and then her life growing up that way, and then really her journey and how she stepped into a big level of self-worth and power for herself from corporate America, moving into nonprofit work, and now supporting and empowering other adoptees and foster care alumni. You will truly be so inspired by what she shares. She is a remarkable human, and I am so grateful that you all get to know her and the important work that she is doing in this world. Before we get started, if you are a high achieving Asian American corporate leader who is ready to permanently reverse cultural conditioning so you can step into your power and thrive, DM me power at Nicole Song on Instagram and let's chat. Okay, friends, let's dig into this incredible conversation. Grace, welcome to the School of Self-Worth. It's so amazing to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Yeah, and I love your story. I love everything about what you're about. And so, really, when people are coming on to School of Self-Worth, especially for the first time, is like I like to talk about your journey into self-worth and that whole. And you have a really interesting background and journey. So I'm wondering if you could actually even go back. I mean, you might go back all the way to the beginning of like how you got to this point here in your life where you're really supporting and advocating for adoptees. Like if you could give us that start of that journey.
Oh yeah. Whew.
I
Going,
know. I was like, this one's going to
yeah,
go way probably. Yeah.
right. I mean, to the beginning,
Yeah.
right? And for folks that don't know who I am and haven't had a chance to read anything in terms of my content, my story, I am a transracial, transnational adoptee, which means I was adopted from a different country into the United States. Transracial. I'm a Korean immigrant that was adopted into a predominantly white family and white community. And, I went through some pretty horrific experiences, both before I was adopted and then immigrated into the US. And then during the whole adoption and then foster care processes, it just really informed me at a young age, right? What my value was or wasn't, if I felt worthy or didn't, really based on the fulfillment that I gave a certain family or community. And I was, from what I know, I was orphaned at about 3 years old. Went into a couple of orphanages in Seoul, South Korea, and then came to the US at about 5 years old into a family that wanted to really, quote unquote, complete their family. They had biological kids, and they wanted one more. And after a couple of years, that family sat me down, the parents, and basically said, we don't want you anymore. You're a pretty bad kid, and we don't know what to do with you, and you're going to go to a different family. And literally 2 days later, the social work came and scooped me up and took me into a different home into the United States, into a foster home. And it ended up being just a pretty wild experience. It was a huge family. And I went there at about age 7. And then that family did end up adopting me at about age 8.
Before
And
we go, I know I want to hear this
sure.
whole story, but like, is that so people can do that? They can adopt you and then actually still like hand you back to the system essentially? I mean, I know nothing about this, so I'm just like, wow, I can't even believe that happened.
Yeah, they can do that.
Oh, okay.
But in my situation, the adoption was never formalized. So
Oh,
I
because
was
it
still
hadn't. Oh,
yeah,
okay. Technically still like
yeah,
a ward of the state.
technically still a foster kid. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Wow.
In
Okay.
that first
Fascinating. Yes. And
family.
I'm sure you're going to get more into like how this all impacted you, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, it's, my story is unique to me,
Mhm.
but the scenario is not as unique as people think. And so, we had a lot of foster kids and adoptive kids in the family that I eventually was placed in. And I saw just a lot of the cyclical, uh, movement of kids coming in and out of the home, being told they were going to be adopted or if they were going back into the foster care system. And throughout, my years there, I really saw the impact of not only that messaging, but just the systemic impact of how that impacted the kids in our family and that came through our home, their self-worth, and again, how they learn to value or not value themselves. And it was heartbreaking, and there were kids that had great experiences in the home, were adopted and stayed long term and all of that kind of stuff. But there were many, myself included, that ended up leaving the home, rejected, without family, and really had to grapple with, what who am I, first of all,
Mhm.
and what is my value into this world? If I can't
Mhm.
even have a family that wants me or values me, then what value do I really bring? And so that was a really constant struggle into my young adulthood. And as I started venturing right into school and my professional life, and then even further still, as I started to build a family of my own, those questions were always a big part of my journey. And long story short, on paper, I became a success story. I did very well in life. And, having been in the foster system, having gone through broken adoptions, just having that whole life experience, I learned to be just very, um, how do I say this? But just take no prisoners. Like,
Mhm.
I don't care what you say about me or think about me. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it. And I'm going to
Mhm.
prove that I'm worthy. So if it's not to a family, right, it's going to be in the workplace. That was really the majority of the value that I put on myself was, since I wasn't valuable to the family that had adopted me, I was going to be very, very valuable to my workplace and to my bosses. And, that's then that archetype of the overworker, the overachiever, putting everything I had into my career and my job. And all, almost 15 years later after doing that and climbing, the steep hills and summiting mountains and then doing it all over again, right? I just looked at myself in the mirror one day and I looked at, those around me, those at the leadership table, and I'm like, I, I clearly am still struggling with this. I have not learned to value myself. I've not learned yet that I'm truly worthy of um, whatever I want to be and what I want to become. I'm still allowing people to tell me what my worth and what my value is. And all that to say, right, then about 2 years ago, I decided to quit my job, decided to do something about a community that I know was very much hurting, but didn't have a lot of resources put in front of them, especially for adults who are adoptees and adults who have experienced foster care. Once you're out of the homes, once you're out of the system, it's kind of like, okay, good luck. You're on your own. You're a whole person. We've done our job, and now you're going to be successful in the world, which is not, it is sometimes true, but sometimes it's not true. We still need support and resources. Even if you haven't been through those systems, you still need support and resources as an adult. And you still need the ability to be a whole person and show up authentically, have those safe spaces, and have the model, right, of how to journey through uh, reclaiming your identity, figuring out your identity, all of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't existing for people like me. And so leaving my job, leaving the sector that I had poured a lot of years into, building and building a name for myself. Um, I knew that this was not a journey I wanted others with my lived experience to have to go through and feel so alone and isolated, and then look back 15 years and be like, I did all of that, and yet I still don't feel the way I thought I should feel. And I launched what's called the Inclusion Initiative. And it's a company that is a platform that elevates, but also resources and builds community for adoptees and foster alums.
Hmm. I mean, such a powerful story, Grace. And I have so many questions for you to kind of like backtrack into that. But first, like, what a journey, right, for that. Because even as you were talking about how you started to compensate, is how I would think of it, with the high achieving and like getting the grades and then doing that in the workplace. You could as easily have gone the other way, like just given up and stopped doing that. And like, do you remember when you started to do that? It was like junior high, high school. Like, when did you start deciding like I better just do really well to prove my worth in the world?
It's ever since I can remember.
Okay,
So
your whole life then.
when I was placed into the first home in the United States, um, I don't know if it was directly said to me. I'm not sure how I formed this idea, but it is a dominant narrative within our society
Mhm.
for adoptees and fosters, right? Like, don't cause trouble, be a good kid. You want to assimilate into your family. You want to be that perfect representation of that family, because they adopted you, or they took you into their home, and this is the value that you provide. And so I, even into that first home when I was about 5 years old, I knew like I had to be what they wanted me to be. At least that's the message I was telling myself.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I might not stay there. I was terrified of being given up. And then 2 years later, that happened.
Right.
And so that became my reality. That was my constant primary objective, was stay in the home, stay in the home, stay in the home. Don't do anything to cause trouble. Don't do anything to put you at risk, right, for being rejected yet again. And so I learned to um, do what I could to always prove, right, that I'm worthy, that I deserve to be there, that I belonged there. And when I was little, right, it was in the form of chores, or eating all my vegetables all the time. Or,
Mhm.
I was a caretaker to a lot of young children because that family was really large. And so it was doing all of those things and doing more and above and beyond constantly. And it was just a message that just became a part of who I was. I didn't know how else to be.
And would you say that's something then you knew, like, from obviously you had lots of siblings and other fellow like foster kids. Were they like that too? Like, is that something you found as like a theme among them? Or is that something more like as an adult you've recognized and started to realize like that's what so many adoptees or foster kids do, is to just really compensate through being good, taking care of the home and doing all of those pieces like you mentioned?
I mean, there's a diversity in terms of, the people and their experiences and how they
Of
come into
course.
homes.
Yeah.
So there are tendencies, I would say. And
Mhm.
so a bulk of us do have that tendency.
Yeah.
But then a bulk of us would have a tendency to um, behave the opposite, so that
Mhm.
they wouldn't ever have to get attached. So that
Right.
they
Right.
would, if they were going to get kicked out of the home, it would just happen right away. So they were not perfectionists. They didn't try to go above and beyond. They were really testing by, this, I'm going to not be that perfect kid, and let's see if you'll accept me for that. And so those were kind of those were like two extreme tendencies
Mhm.
that often happen, I feel, in our community.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, if that could go that way as well. Okay, so
Mhm.
now let's just fast forward again back into your career. So what kind of work did you start doing after college?
Oh, well, I started working well before college. And, my college journey was pretty untraditional,
Mm.
ranging from really getting kicked out of like the private school after the first year, that I attended in undergrad, and then figuring out that that was not a pathway for me. And so I went into community college and then found my way into a state school. And so it took me about 9 years to finish my undergrad degree through that entire journey. And but I was fortunate enough to begin my what would you say, my professional career, my first, salaried job and everything during that school journey. And so my first experience was I was in the middle of community college, and the hospitality industry was really my first experience having a professional job, a desk job. And I was in sales and event development and event production for the hotel industry. And that was very interesting. Yeah, it really, my career just kind of took off from there.
Okay, fascinating. So cool. Well, and so now I'm curious then, right? So you did all of this, like you worked in the professional world for a while, and then you came to the conclusion you're like, this isn't really working for me anymore. And that I think is a journey like many of the women who are listening relate to, or like they either desire that or have they've gone through that journey themselves. And for you, with coming from the background that you did, like it must have just taken so much for you to be able to feel like I can leave this secure world of this job, this professional world to like start my own thing. And what would you say is that how did that journey begin for you to really recognize and say, okay, I'm going to step out of this like more mainstream choice into a really non-traditional choice of doing something on my own?
Yeah, I kind of had practice with it 10 years ago,
Mm.
because when I switched from corporate sales and events and switched into the nonprofit sector. So that was for, at least in my world, that was not mainstream. People are like, "What are you doing?
Mhm.
Like, you're doing really well in this corporate sales world. You're gonna go to nonprofits and like work for nothing?" And I was like, honestly, I need to live by my values. I know what it's like to, need support systems like this, and I want to be part of that world. I want to be part of that community, supporting and helping people that were like me when I was growing
Mhm.
up. And so, I entered the space. Yeah, I mean, there's great career tracks in the nonprofit sector. It can be a really, really great professional, career pathway. But for me, it was, yeah, I really did have to start over. And it was interesting kind of being from a very different world, entering this new world, not really being understood. And it was, what I had found though was that all of my years of, you know, having to really understand how to pivot, kind of be a chameleon within the homes that I was in. I was Asian, had grown up and started my career in a very white community in the Midwest. And so always having to kind of be very visible Asian, but also hide that piece of myself and not really relate that piece of myself to the external world. Like all of these things had given me a pretty great skill set on top of the corporate skills that I had to be able to navigate the nonprofit space
Mhm.
and build, climb up the career ladder and really, you know, build something that I had never dreamed that I could be. And, I had worked for several nonprofits. So, I was not one to stay at a company for 10 years. I enjoyed moving quickly, learning, and when I outgrew roles, then I would pivot into a role that I felt like I could learn and grow into even more. And so when I decided to leave the sector and start this, yeah, it was really scary. Um, but what had prepared me along the way, I think, was my entire life journey of kind of knowing how to pivot and knowing
Mm.
like change was very familiar to me.
Yeah.
Change, it was kind of my comfort zone in a weird way. And I think, if I'm going to be honest, like the nonprofit world was becoming a anchor of stability for me, right? I knew what I was doing. I had I had built the skill set. I knew the world that I was in. A lot of prolific nonprofit leaders I was getting to know. And I started to feel kind of uncomfortable, weirdly, because of the stability. So, switching and launching this venture and trying something new, um, it felt familiar while it felt really scary.
Mm. Yeah, well, I can only imagine that you're obviously very resilient from the way that you grew up. So in certain ways, other people who've grown up, right, not with that kind of background that's constantly shifting, it might be scarier for us to make a move. Like I can see for myself, like it was really nerve-wracking because I didn't have as much change like you did as a kid. It was always pretty stable and steady. So making change felt like, oh my gosh, kind of terrifying. But you, it sounds like it was like the flip side for that. So that's really powerful. Yeah, you're like, here we go, doing something else.
Oh yeah, I was terrified, believe me. But yeah, I knew I had the skill set to be able to thrive into this new venture that I was
Mm.
building.
Well, this is, I'm curious then now from like a different tack on self-worth, around the connection to your Korean identity and culture, being adopted into a white families or largely predominantly white families. Like, I don't know if you have articulated or know like how that affected you as a kid, but then also as an adult, like how does that, I'm just curious about that journey into like that connection and relationship to that side of yourself.
Hmm. Yes, being Asian was always a bad thing for me when
Mhm.
I was growing up. I was so ashamed of it. And I was made to feel ashamed of it because of, just the racism I experienced, the messages I was given, the subtle or not so subtle messages from all those around me, recognizing I was Asian, right? And letting me know in their own way, like, yeah, yeah, you are different. You don't really belong with us. Why are you here?
Mhm.
And that holds true like with the family that I was in, the community I was in, later in the very like white dominated workspaces I was in. It's just a constant reminder of being Asian. And for me, it was a constant self loathing that I had when I was young, when I was little. And I feel like a lot of Asian immigrants can relate to this. Asian immigrants that are not surrounded by their community, right? When they come to
Yeah.
the US, we want to look like the typical quote unquote American. I grew up wanting blonde hair and blue eyes and hated how I looked. I was told a lot, right? How funny I looked, I wasn't beautiful, all this stuff because I was Asian and was made fun of a lot. And so that coupled with, just the stereotypes and the biases and even the silly things that people would say which are racist, which was like, oh wow, you speak English, like, well, why do you speak English so well, things like that, right? It just compounded into a lot of internalized racism. I didn't know that though at the time. All I knew was that I had to present as white as possible, speak as white as possible, learn to be as white as possible so that I didn't have to stand out as much, right? I could never really change my face. I was always going to look Asian. But maybe if I dressed, styled, spoke, carried myself as, in the white way, then maybe it wouldn't matter that I was Asian. And that's how I navigated a lot of my childhood and the young adulthood. And I look back now and I just, oh gosh, it's painful to look at some photos and have some of those memories because I was I was a really cute kid and I was a really attractive young adult.
Mhm.
And it pains me that when I looked in the mirror, all I saw was ugly.
Yeah.
All I saw was a hatred for how I looked. And it's not something, those years I won't get back, but I'm so grateful that, throughout this journey, um, really of trying to reclaim my identity, my story as an adoptee and as a foster, it has really helped me embrace the Asian American part of me. And I really, when I look back at, I only have two pictures of me in the orphanage, and I have very few pictures of me as a young person. But when I look at those pictures of me in the orphanages, it makes me really sad that I have nothing else that connects me to Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I lost the language. I changed, my name was changed for me. My name was made up actually because they didn't know who I was. Um, just nothing, right? And I spent so many decades. I, I've never been back to Korea. I spent a lot of decades never even eating Korean food because I was trying to stay away from it, right? I was trying to dissociate myself from being Asian. So much that I didn't eat the amazing, wonderful food that I really love now. It's my go to comfort food now. But, I lost all those years of embracing being Korean and
Mm-hmm.
embracing being Asian. And those are really core pieces of me. It is, what I was born into was Korea. And the fact that I lost that for decades because I just literally self rejected it, it hurts a lot and it makes me really sad. But, when 2020 hit, for me, that was a big year of trying to understand myself, trying to understand how I fit in as an Asian American, yet not I didn't feel fully Asian and I definitely knew I wasn't white, but that was like the world that I had grown up in, but I didn't belong in either really. And I was very confused about what my voice should be, why I wasn't being included, like my community, people like me were not being included in DEIB conversations and race conversations, right? We were often brushed aside like, "Oh, well, you're adopted, you don't really get it." Or I would get comments too, like, "Oh, you're Asian, you don't experience racism," things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, 2020 was a, those couple of years. It was a lot of just self reflection and learning and asking questions and having really hard critical conversations with other people of color, with black people, and with my white community too, about what this all meant for me to be Asian and adopted and Korean, and yet knowing nothing about my Korean heritage or culture or even the language. And so, I came really, I give a lot of credit to my years in grad school. I had the good fortune of being accepted into NYU in my 30s and doing their master's program, their MBA. And I was just surrounded by really amazing, incredible Asian people, some from Korea and many other Asian countries, and American Asians as well. And they just had such a love and such a appreciation for their cultures that they brought in every single day. I got to hear stories, and they would take me to the restaurants. They had to take me to Koreatown because I had no idea what I was doing. And they really gave me like a really immersive experience in terms of like what it meant to be really proud of being
Mm-hmm.
Asian American. And even if they were second gen immigrants, right, they still were very connected to their Asian heritage through their families. And it was through that experience finally where I was just like, man, I am missing this. They are so proud of who they are, and I am not. Why is that? That's not okay. And that also coupled, right, with things going on in my own life about wanting to show up and wanting to make change for myself. And, I wanted to be visible. Like I felt like I was kind of disappearing into the world in my comfort zone, right, in the nonprofit space. And just, I um, wasn't really challenging myself to like live my life to the fullest, and I didn't want that anymore. And so my NYU classmates really taught me a big lesson about being proud of um, your heritage and your culture and your community. And so as I navigated through school and finished up, and then really then decided, hey, you know what? It's time to fully embrace being proud of who I am, which also includes the Asian part of me, but it also includes the adoptee, the foster, everything that I am. I'm not just one thing, I'm not a box. So the intersectionality of what makes me me, I learned to really embrace all of that and appreciate that, and then became very loud about it and built my company and started really being a voice, a representation for people with my lived experience. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I journeyed through accepting and loving and really celebrating my Asian identity.
Well, I know that your experience obviously is yours, but it's what much of what you said, like I really resonate with as well. Like I grew up in the Midwest, like mostly white people around you. And it's like your experience, like, I had Asian parents and family and culture, but I also rejected it because you're just like, well, that's not what's normal. That's not what surrounds you. And like, I wanted to be Kimberly with blonde hair and blue eyes. Also, like you just have these ideas about it. And so, what you're saying, I feel like is very resonant for probably almost, any person of color who grows up in this country, especially if you grew up in communities like I had a lot of friends in college who grew up in like, New York City and like really surrounded by tons of Asians. And I just didn't have that experience. And so it's fascinating, right? Like all these different ways that we experience what it's like to grow up that way. The racism you experienced growing up as a kid when you grew up in predominantly white communities. And so I really relate to what you're saying. And then, of course, now bringing in the fact that you didn't have family introducing you to that culture or allowing you like that return to it, because I feel like
Yeah.
I hear from like a lot of people who didn't grow up that way that in their adulthood is also a time where they start to kind of re embrace their culture, their heritage, or they have kids and they're like, I don't want my kid to be separated from something that's really important to me, or I want them to be connected to that. So, I related a lot to what you're sharing. And then I was like, wow, but then yeah, like you said, bring in the intersectionality of like different family experience and then trying to learn all these things as an adult when you didn't grow up with it. So I'm curious, have you been to Korea since, or have you thought about that?
Well, and to your point, right? I started building a family, and so
Mm,
I ended up having a little girl 3 years ago, and that was also a part of my journey, right, into reclaiming my Asian identity and being really proud of it. And so, no, I have not been back to Korea yet, but yes, I will. So the
mm,
plan is, to bring her, my husband, and experience that together
mhm,
and be able to like have um oh boy, so have family in Korea for the first time that
mm,
is biologically related to me in Korea, and going back to, my home country where, I had to um I was separated from my birth family and had to relinquish all that, not by choice, right? But that was just the circumstance that I was in. So I want to go back, but with this family and, my new story, my new appreciation of my identities, and come back as the new Grace into this country that, I really have grown to love and appreciate and revere too. And I'm very excited for that experience.
yeah, I love that for you. That will be so powerful and expansive for sure.
Thank you.
I'm curious, would you mind giving us like a few numbers on you have transracial adoptees, like how many are there in this country? Like, can you give us like a sense of the community and numbers?
Yeah, well, I really focus on both the adoptee community and the
Mm,
foster community here in the United States. So combined, there
mhm.
is an estimated there's between 13 to 15 million of us in the United
Oh,
States.
wow.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the largest number of transracial adoptees into the United States was actually Korean adoptees. They really initiated and started the whole movement for international adoptions pretty much globally. So the
Mm,
US was the first country to bring mass amounts of kids from Korea, and
mhm.
it was because of the Korean War.
Right.
That was really a catalyst for all of that. So there's nearly there's over 350 Korean adoptees into the United States alone. So that's a significant number, and that's the largest group representative of one group of
You said
transracial.
350 or 350?
I'm sorry, 350,000.
Okay, that's what I figured. I was like, I
Thank
bet it was
you.
more than okay, just making sure.
350,000. Yeah,
Yeah, but that is a
350,000.
lot. Yeah, and all probably
Yeah.
from that era from, like, the aftermath of the Korean War.
It was, spread over 4 decades.
4 decades.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a lot of
Yeah,
people.
so
Yeah.
from really, like, the '60s through the, early 2000s, and then, Chinese adoptees also represent a huge number of transracial adoptees into this country. So there's over 100K, Chinese adoptees in the US.
Okay, and then you're focusing on transracial or transnational
No, I focus on adoptees.
adoptees. Oh, sorry, that's
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah,
Adoptees and
adoptees
then
and
crossed over
foster
with
alumni.
foster too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, because we all technically were, foster kids until we were formally adopted by our families. So
Right, so
people don't
really you're
really
both.
realize that.
Adoptee, foster is, like, really the same for them. Yeah, and then what have you found? Like, I mean, I'm sure that you've gathered people together, like, what has it been like to be able to be the catalyst for this community?
It's been surprising. It's been really special. I hadn't really found my people before,
Mm,
and I hadn't found my people because I wasn't being authentic to myself. I was constantly code switching and trying to be something that the world was telling me I was supposed to be. And when I leaned into my intersectionality, I found people that had similar intersectionality and similar experiences, and I started to find my people. And so being able to represent this community in a bigger way through this platform, this company that I'm building for them, the Inclusion Initiative, it's been really special. Um, I was surprised at how resonant it would be with folks in the community, but also outside of the community.
mhm,
I knew that there weren't a lot of platforms or resources for us, but it wasn't until I built the Inclusion Initiative and then the influx of people just wanting to be a part of it did I
mhm,
realize, like, wow, this is a big need. We are a huge community, and why has it taken us so long to really, build things like this for ourselves? And, I think part of it is because many of us are finally coming into our own, right? We're starting to have families of our own, getting into the more advanced career stages where we're like, wait, this, I want to be more authentically me. And so leaning into this community is a part of how we can do that. But really, it's being able to elevate other voices that maybe are not exactly like mine, right? I have people who are Black adoptees in my community. I have people who are Hispanic or Latino foster alumni in my community, but being able to, like, share their stories on my platform, have them share their stories, and be able to, for them to be able to tell their truth and
mhm,
reclaim their stories in their own way, like just having that ripple effect across multiple generations, actually, because it's them, it's their families, it's their kids, and so on and so forth. It's been really special and unexpected. Like I said, when I started this, it that was I didn't know what to expect. I just knew that this had to exist because I
mm,
wanted it and I needed it. And so, like, the ripple effect has been pretty profound. And looking, 2 years ago, it's been such a gift to see where we've come in such a short time, and knowing that we're just getting started too. I'm really excited about that. All that's to come.
mm. Well, one of the things I really admire about you, Grace, is how you are really open about your story, like on social media platforms like LinkedIn. Like you really are there all the time and consistent about it. And I feel like that's just how people start to know that story. Cause like I can't think of someone off the top of my head in my community who fits adoptee, foster. And I'm sure that I do know them and they may not have shared their stories or I may not know about it. And like there is a need, like you said, I think for all of us, I always think about how I create communities that I need as well. Like more spaces. And she and I are in a joint Asian American space. It's like you need spaces, and sometimes you don't even know that you need them until they exist. And you're like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly where I need to be. And so I love that you have created that for your people, and how powerful. And like your story is just so powerful, and everything that, your life story, and then just what you've turned it into is just super incredible and really amazing.
Thank you. And I will just add too that this whole experience, right, finally reclaiming my story, finding my people, like, I mean, your podcast is about self-worth and
Mhm.
reclaiming your self-worth. Like, that's exactly what happened. I realized like I was already worthy. I was
Mhm.
already of value. I hadn't known it yet until I found my people. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Grace, for so much for all of that.
mhm.
Well, are you ready for some rapid fire questions
I
to
am.
complete our conversation? Okay, amazing. So, we're just shifting gears a little bit, everybody here. What was the last thing that you watched on television?
Oh, the Great British Baking Show Holiday Edition.
Holiday. Fun. Perfect holiday TV to be watching.
I'm a big baker, so yes.
Oh, so fun. Although when I watch those shows, I'm always like, I can't bake that. You guys are just like doing it from off the top of your head. Can you bake like that?
And I'm like, "Oh, I need to try that
Oh,
next
okay.
time."
Okay.
Yep.
Fun.
Or, "Ooh, that's how you do that."
Oh, that's what
Mhm.
happens in that state.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Okay, second question is, what is on your nightstand?
I mean, my phone. And I have, Kerry Washington's memoir right now,
Oh,
so
cool.
I'm in the middle of reading that, which I love.
Super fun.
Mhm.
Okay, when was the last time you tried something new, and what was it?
Oh, boy. Can launching a company be one?
I mean, that definitely counts.
I'm
I think
trying
so.
something new every day because of the inclusion initiative, which is really cool. So I actually just launched a podcast.
Oh, you did too. Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's a very big adventure. So that's exciting.
thank
Amazing.
you. Thank you.
Okay, last one, really simple. What are the top 3 most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, I don't know if it's a millennial thing, but I use a lot of the blushing smiley.
Mhm,
I use a lot of the heart hands
mhm.
and the actual red heart. Like those are my go-to.
Love it. Love it. So fun. Well, Grace, what is the best way for people to reach you and to find out more about what you do?
You can go to theinclusioninitiative.com. You'll find the page for the podcast and our community and just what we're all about. And you can also find me on LinkedIn at Grace Young Foster. And I hope you connect with me.
Yeah, so please reach out and follow Grace. And she just posts really powerful stories about her own childhood, and then just really about what she's doing with the Inclusion Initiative. So definitely worth your time. And Grace, I'm just grateful for you for being in my world and coming on to share about your self-worth journey, and just really being so open and vulnerable with what you've been through. And I know that it is inspiring so many people. It's inspired me today for sure. So thank you so much for being on with us.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Thanks for everything you do as well. It's just an honor to be on your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much.